Well, welcome back to Course 2 in the Methods and Tactics course of the No Man Left Behind Self-Paced Training. I'm here with Pat Morley, David Delk, and Charles Cooper. I'm Brett Clemmer, and we're excited about this next session, Building Allies and Leaders. Now, in the last session, we talked about the importance of vision, of calling men to a big challenge, to something bigger than themselves. And in this session, we're going to talk about how important it is to get your allies in your church and your leaders on board with that vision as well. Guys, what have you seen that's helped people really connect to the vision of the church and become interested in other guys growing in their faith?
Well, without a doubt, Brett, is personal victory. Having a personal victory in my own life inspires me to want to see that victory happen in the lives of other men.
That's good, Charles. And I think a kind of maybe an extension of that is when a guy sees a change in a man he cares about. Maybe it's a neighbor, the father of a friend of his child, somebody at work, and he sees God move in that person's life. All of a sudden, he's a lot more interested in what's going on with the men of our church because he's seen it really make a difference for a man.
Yeah, that's good.
I'm reminded to think about the motivational structure of a man's heart and the three things that all men want: a cause they can give their lives to, a companion they can share it with, and then some kind of a conviction that gives a reasonable explanation for why the first two things are so difficult. And so the idea of a cause, I want my life to count. All men do. I want my life to make a difference. I don't want to be some shooting star that streaks across the sky one night and then disappears. Stephen Jobs said that he wants to leave a dent in the universe. And this is one of the main ways that men are wired, is they really want their lives to count, to make a difference. Let's call it the need to be significant, if you like. And so if we can connect the vision to this innate desire that men have to make a difference, to do something useful with their lives, then we have a real positive chance of capturing them into our vision.
Well, that'll be a powerful tool with us as we seek to bring men's discipleship to be one of the core priorities of our churches, is when people really understand that it's pulling them along, it's bringing them into the bigger vision of the church and of the faith, really. Well, let's get to it. Let's get into this next session. We're going to talk about what it takes to build allies, what it takes to build leaders in our churches.
Welcome to Session 2 of the Methods and Tactics course in our No Man Left Behind Self-Paced Training. And we're going to continue to build this implementation plan for how the No Man Left Behind model can become a part of kind of the DNA of our church. We already talked about the vision and the idea of coming up with a way of describing all the men of our church and what God is doing and what we pray God will do through the men of our church to have an impact. And so we want to build on that in this session about building allies and leaders. How do we make our ministry with men sustainable over the long term? Well, the only way to do that is to be constantly adding to the number of men who are passionate about seeing men be discipled in our church. It's very interesting when you think about kind of the common perspective on a ministry with men in the church. If before you took a course like this or before you read the book No Man Left Behind, our experience was that many churches would have defined their ministry to men as a circle that represented all of the men's only activities that they did in their church. If you said, "What's your men's ministry?" they would have said, "Okay, well, this is it. It's the breakfasts that we have on a monthly basis, or it's the men who are involved in small groups, or it's the men who went on a mission trip, or the men who took a retreat." And that's kind of the definition. And actually, a lot of men's leaders would have been focused on this, right? How many men came to our breakfast? How many men are signed up for our retreat? How many men are going to the national men's event? How many men are in a small group right now, right? And this would have been kind of the focus. Well, I hope you understand that of all the things you can focus on in your ministry to men, this is probably the least important. It's not that it's completely unimportant, but it's probably the least important, okay? Because one of the things that we've already done is we've demonstrated to you that there is a bigger circle. When we talk about an all-inclusive ministry to men, now we realize, wait a minute, it's really not so important, the things that I'm doing that impact men only, because I've got all of these different ministry efforts that are impacting men through my church. And so really, I ought to be, as a leader, concerned about all the ways that my church is touching men. And listen to this. This inner circle is not a measure of success in ministry to men. The number of men at your men's breakfast, the number of men in your men's ministry, the number of men that are going on a retreat, that's not how you measure success in your ministry to men. The only measure of success in your ministry to men is our church producing mature male disciples? Is our church producing mature male disciples? If you can do that exclusively through all-inclusive activities where children are there or women are there or whatever, and you don't do anything for men only, and yet your church is producing a ton of mature male disciples, you have got a fantastic ministry to men. Okay? You've got a fantastic, because that's the deal. You're trying to produce mature male disciples. You're not trying to get guys to come to a breakfast. You're not trying to get guys to go on a retreat. You're trying to produce disciples. And so we want to focus on this outer circle, but I also want to share with you the importance of focusing on an inner circle of men that we call allies. Allies. When you think about how you interact with guys in your church, let's say you were going to plan an activity or a ministry opportunity. Maybe it was going to be a barbecue. Okay, so you're about to have a barbecue. And you announce that event to them. You say, Thursday night, 4 weeks from now, we're going to have a barbecue, we're going to eat this, somebody's going to speak, we're going to sing, whatever. What are the questions or the thoughts that are going to go through people's minds, the men's minds, as they hear you announce that event, in terms of whether or not they're going to come? What are some of the questions that they're going to ask in their head?
Who's the speaker?
Okay, am I going to like the speaker? Okay, what else?
Is there anything conflicting?
Do I have room in my calendar? Do I have time for this? Okay, what else?
What are we going to eat?
Okay, am I going to like the food? Okay, all right. Will I know anybody who's there? Right? And now, what do all those questions have in common? The word I. The word I. When you sell events to your men, okay, and I'm using the word sell loosely here, you understand what I mean. When you promote and talk about events or activities to your men, and let it be about the event or the activity, you have lost the battle already, okay? Because your event or activity is not going to be better than the NBA playoffs, or the hunting trip, or the college football game, or the new movie that just got released, or whatever, the video game marathon, whatever, okay? If you're competing at the event or the activity level, you are going to lose. You don't want to play on that playing field because you're just allowing guys to continue to stay in this mindset that it's about me and that I evaluate this on whether I want to do it or not, and whether, all these different questions that are I. Instead, what you want to do is you want to sell the vision, not the events. You want to promote the vision, not the activity or the task or whatever. So every time you talk about any kind of activity, it always should be in the context of the vision. So, for example, I go to speak, I've probably spoken at 175 churches or something like that now, and I bet on less than two hands, I could count the churches that have placed my being there in the context of anything bigger than just that night. In other words, how do you normally get introduced if you're a guest speaker? Well, guys, thanks for coming out tonight. We're really happy you're here. And we have David Delkin, and he's from Florida, and we're so happy to have him. David, come on up. Well, why are we here? How does this connect to what we did 3 months ago? How does it connect to what we're doing 2 months from now? Why are you asking me to take this night off and come here? Because this guy's going to be so interesting? I don't think so, right? I want to know that something's happening. So promote the vision. We're here because we want to reach every man in East Orlando for Christ. And, a couple months ago, we had so-and-so, and you remember what he said, and he did this, and now we're building on that tonight. And that's going to lead us to 2 months from now when we're doing our community service projects. And all of a sudden, the guys say, oh, wow, look at this. We're headed somewhere here. There's a point to this thing, In the same way, you ask a guy to do a task, like bringing the Cokes or setting up the chairs or whatever. Don't just say, hey, we're having a barbecue. We need somebody to bring the drinks. Will you bring the drinks? Say, look, you know that the purpose of our men, the purpose of First Men is to try to reach every man in our community for Christ. And we've made some headway. We've got some guys that are starting to, in their relationship with Christ, that 2 or 3 months ago had nothing to do with him or the church. And so we're going to do this barbecue because we want to reach every man in our community for Christ. And we need some help. We need somebody to bring the drinks because if you're going to reach men, you got to give them something to drink while they're there. You can't have them thirsty. So would you bring the drinks to help us reach every man in our community for Christ? Now, that's a little overstated, okay? Just a tiny bit, though. You got to make it really, really, you got to really go overboard with guys so they get it. And listen, obviously, 19 out of 20 times it's going to go in one ear and out the other. I mean, they're just going to bring the drinks. But occasionally, a guy's going to see somebody show up at the barbecue. He's going to be like, I can't believe that Stan is here. You know, he's seen Stan yelling at his kids at the Little League games, and he's like, man, how did Stan, who convinced Stan to come, you know? And then a couple weeks later, he's going to see Stan at the church with his family. They're going to see him join the church. And he's going to be like, man, we really are reaching men in our community for Christ. And I brought the drinks. Okay, maybe not the last part.
The Apostle Paul, the greatest teacher this world will ever know, particularly as it relates to the content of the Christian faith. Now, if you're a great man like the Apostle Paul, been the recipient of such great truth, as no doubt he was, what would you want to do with all of that truth that you now have in your hands? It just makes sense that you would want to communicate that truth to a man that you trust. And that's exactly what the Apostle Paul tells us in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2, that the truth that he taught, witnessed by so many, he now commits to Timothy, his student. And he is trusting Timothy to teach that truth to men in the next generation. Each generation succeeding, carrying on the great traditions of our faith. I can't think of anything more important. And here at Man in the Mirror, in fact, we emulated in this very material that you're learning. We're communicating the truths that we believe are vital for not only the transformation of a man, but a family, a nation, the world. And so you can see the why we're so passionate about this, that as we have communicated this truth to you, we are hoping that you're going to communicate that same truth to men in your church, and that those men will spread out all over the world and continue to take the vital message of Jesus Christ, the transforming power and the setting free of grace that we have discovered, we hope you have discovered, and that you are now sending to someone else around the world.
And so now what happens when you get a guy to catch on at the vision level, because you're promoting the vision and not the event? When you get a guy to catch on at the vision level, you've got somebody who's an ally. So the next time you say, hey, we're going to have this opportunity, or we're doing this project, or we're working on this, he's not going through the list of, I like the food, or do I know anybody, or all this kind of stuff. He's starting to say, how can I be a part of this? Is there somebody I can bring? Can I help? What can I do? Because I want to help reach our community, all the men in our community for Christ. See, he's come on board at the vision level. And so what we want to do is we want to constantly be increasing the number of men who are allies. And if you're growing the number of men who are allies in your church, then you're headed for great things. You know, some of you are here and you say, there may only be 2 or 3 guys in our church that really are passionate about helping men grow. Start there. If those 2 or 3 guys will get together with 1 man a month for breakfast or lunch, share your elevator speech, explain why you're passionate about reaching men, if 10% of those guys would catch it by the end of the year, then you're going to double. So instead of 3, you'll have 6. Do it again for another year. Instead of 6, you'll have 12. Do it again for another year, you'll have 24. You get 24 guys in a church passionate about reaching the men in their community for Christ, and God's going to do something amazing. So we want to build allies, because it's out of those allies, by promoting the vision, by getting guys to catch on to that vision that resonates with them at the heart level, those are the men who become our future leaders. Because they're not there just because of the activity or the event. They're there because they believe in what God's going to do through the men of your church. And now I'd like to invite Brett Klemmer, our Vice President of Leadership, to come and talk to us about how to actually build new leaders in our ministry to men. Brett?
Thanks, Dave. Well, Dave did a great job of showing us how to build allies among the men of our church. What I want to talk to you about in the rest of this session is to talk about how do we recruit new leaders. Anybody have enough leaders? Yeah, no hands are up. We all want to find new leaders, and so we're going to talk about how do we find these leaders, how do we bring them onto our teams and get them involved in the church, and where do we find them even in the first place. Before we do that, though, I want to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you two stories, actually. Anybody recognize this guy on the left side of the screen? There, standing with his hands in front of him. Al Capone. Al Capone. You remember, you've all heard the stories of Al Capone, a famous, probably maybe the most notorious organized crime figure. And Al Capone ran all kinds of businesses, as they say. And what he really relied on, though, was his accountant. His accountant's name was Easy Eddie. And Easy Eddie kept the books for Al. He actually kept several sets of books for Al. And he was rewarded very well for keeping those books. He had an entire city block that Al gave him in the city of Chicago. He had a big house. He had butlers and maids and drivers and all those things. But Easy Eddie, as he was keeping Al Capone's books and keeping Al out of jail, came to realize that the one thing that he didn't have was he did not have a legacy that he could pass on to his son. And so one day, as he was looking down at his son, he thought, I just can't do this anymore. And so he went to the FBI and he turned state's evidence on Al Capone. And Easy Eddie is the one that testified and put Al Capone into jail. And he knew that this would not be a safe thing to do. And in fact, it was just several weeks later that Easy Eddie's bullet-riddled body was found in a back alley of Chicago. But at least he died knowing that he had, in some small way, brought about a little bit of redemption for his legacy to his son. So that's the story of Easy Eddie. Go forward a few years, there's another man whose name was Butch O'Hare. And Butch O'Hare was a fighter pilot in World War II in the Pacific, and he took off with his flight squadron from an aircraft carrier. One day they were going on a mission. He had been idling on the aircraft carrier deck for a little while, and as he got into the air and they were heading towards their target, he realized that they had forgotten to top his fuel tanks off before he left, and he would not have enough fuel to complete the mission. So he radioed a squadron commander. A squadron commander said, "No, go back to the carrier. We're not going to have you crash on this mission." So as he turned around and as he headed back to his aircraft carrier, what did he see but a flight of Japanese Zeros about to stumble on the American fleet? And so he turned his airplane towards those Japanese Zeros and he took them out. He flew in and out of them. He used up all his ammunition. Once he'd used up all his ammunition, he started trying to clip their tails, clip their wings. And finally, he was such a nuisance, he had shot down so many of them that they just turned around and flew off. He landed on the deck of his carrier, his plane all shot up, and didn't really say very much, but he had a camera on his plane. And so the film told the tale of his heroic actions. And you may have recognized the name Butch O'Hare, because if you go to the airport in Chicago today, it's O'Hare Airport, and you can actually go. There's a little shrine or museum set up between Terminals 1 and 2, and you can see a replica of the aircraft carrier and of his plane. The interesting thing about the story, though, is that Butch O'Hare is Easy Eddie's son. And if you were to look at this little 8, 9, 10-year-old boy walking down the street holding the hand of his dad with a nice fedora on and a suit, you would know that he was the son of an organized crime figure. You would never believe that that boy would grow up to be a hero, the first ace in the Pacific in World War II. Because you would have an expectation of him based on what you see. The biggest barrier that we face as we're trying to get men involved in leadership is that we're men. We buy with our eyes. We look at the outward appearance of things and we make judgment calls based on how a man looks or how a man acts, how a man speaks, how a man sort of interacts with us, and we make judgments of him. And sometimes that can cause us to overlook the fact that you may be looking at a raw talent, at a raw leader, a man who could step up and be a part of your leadership, but you discount him. You think, that guy's not ready. Maybe if we can polish off some of those rough edges, he can be ready. So what I want to talk about here really quickly is how do you recognize a leader in the raw? What are the raw materials of a leader, and then how do we develop that guy? Well, so I'm going to give you 3 characteristics of a raw leader. The first one is that he is inquisitive. He's curious. He questions everything. It's annoying sometimes. He's always asking, well, why? Why are we doing that? Why are we doing it this way? Why can't we do it that way? And sometimes these guys can just be so off-putting that you're just like, man, just leave me alone. You just want to get away from him. He's inquisitive. He's curious. The second thing is that he has initiative. A lot of these guys are surrounded by a cloud of dust. Their mantra is ready, fire. Oh yeah, aim. Right? They're charging ahead. They're going up and they're stepping on toes, and they're the guy that wants to get the project done now. And they don't really care about process a lot of times, but they want to get it done. They are